I think that plays well to our next speaker, but once again, I want to thank the two speakers for taking time. The sequence of today's speakers was well thought out of. So we wanted to bring up the first two speakers, an engineer, how an engineer thinks, and bring in a marketing person and how they work together. And then they came up with the idea of making it a little bit more lighthearted and really performed well, and I really appreciate today's presentation. It was perfect. So we'll take it on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to be speaking today about marketing new product introductions and mobility in SaaS from ideation to marketing execution. So it really plays well for what the questions that was just asked, is how well do the engineers work with marketing, and do they look at the end user before they create their marketing plan and designing of the product. But at the end of the day, we're all here because we are marketing to engineers. So our next speaker is Rob McGreevy. Rob is responsible for the Invensys operation, information and asset management software business globally. This includes responsibility for defining and executing the software product and business strategy. Rob comes to Invensys, which is now part of Schneider Electric, I want to make that very clear, with over 18 years of experience working in the software business with a focus on manufacturing and industrial applications, serving markets such as water, food, beverage, pharmaceutical, and medical device manufacturing. He has held positions within sales, product marketing, and business management for various companies within the software industry, including General Electric, Emerson, Rockwell Automation. Rob has extensive experience in product and business management, M&A work, sales and marketing, and is a graduate of the University of Iowa. So where he studied computer science and journalism and communications. So we've been trying to get Rob speak at the last two events, and his schedule didn't work out, but we're glad to have Rob. Let's give Rob a round of applause.
Thanks. Great. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks for reminding me I bagged out the last two times. That's, I deserve that, I suppose. I'll stand back here for a minute. I'm one of those guys that has to kind of walk around when he talks, so bear with me. So yeah, just a little bit of background, I guess, beyond what Jim had mentioned. You know, I spent most of my time on the software vendor side of things. So we make software products for the industrial manufacturing segment. That's kind of what we have been doing for the past, or what I've been doing for the past almost 20 years now. And I certainly have more of a business responsibility now, but product marketing, product management, launch process, Marcom, all the stuff that we do, it's critical. It's absolutely critical what we do. So I think what I'd want to point out is that even though I have a line of business responsibility, marketing is right in the front and center of what we do every day, because it's super critical to get that right. Not only from the launch and marketing perspective, but the ideation process and the development up front. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. I did want to lay a little bit of, provide a little context for you and a little bit of some assumptions about this session. I think first of all, as I mentioned, we do sort of infrastructure and industrial manufacturing. That's kind of our thing. So we're in plants, food plants, power plants, water plants, airports. They use our software to do control and things like that. I bring that up because that's the perspective from which I'm going to talk about how we market our users and our engineering community. Second thing I would say is that we certainly address engineering, but I don't want to leave out the IT side, because more and more in industrial manufacturing and infrastructure, these things are becoming married together, where we have engineering IT, or manufacturing IT, that's part and parcel to engineering. So those lines have certainly become blurred, and that has implications for how you want to market, or at least how we perceive you should market and sell and promote things as you build your campaigns out. So that's another, I guess, piece of context for you, is that's the perspective I'm coming from. The other thing I'll say is that we launch a lot of products, and in our space, we generally do a lot of follow-ons, right? The next point release, the next incarnation of a certain product line. But what I'm going to talk about here are new product introductions, and the rules there for us, we found, are very different. So how you approach a new product introduction into a sort of a new segment or a new industry, in particular for engineering, is very different than how you may do stuff for existing carry-on or follow-on products. So that's a little bit of a, I guess, a context setting. The other thing is I'm not going to go through a lot of sort of basics, assumptions on the 4Ps, 4Cs, all that good stuff. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the execution plans of marketing programs or integrated marketing. My esteemed colleague and partner in crime, Mary Ann's going to cover that just following me. But it's certainly a critical piece of any type of marketing campaign that you do. So I'm not going to get into it in a lot of detail, but it is super important. So stay tuned, and Mary Ann will tell you how it actually gets done. So with that, what is the focus on this session? Well, it's entitled New Product Introductions for Software as a Service in Mobile. And that's really the backdrop. I always find it easier to talk through lessons learned, best practices and things through the lens of an actual example. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the product, not because I'm trying to sell you on it, but I think it'll help you sort of get your head wrapped around the concepts and the challenges that we had. The bottom line is we launched a product called Wonderware Online and Smart Glance. Those are their product names. It was definitely a new product introduction, started about 3.5 years ago for us. And what I'm going to do is talk to you about some of the concepts and things that we learned throughout that process as a backdrop for it. So I will tell you a little bit about the product, but not because I think you are going to use it or be interested in it, but more because it'll help you lay the groundwork for some of the concepts that are super important in making these things successful. I'll talk about the audience, challenges, the opportunities that we had, and certainly the considerations that you should at least think about as you're doing these types of products, again, for new product introductions. And then we'll certainly talk about execution. So with that as kind of I'd say, context setting and background, I'll talk about some of the topics I'll cover. First of all, I will talk a little bit about the perspective of engineers. I think certainly Leonard and Britt did a great job, I think, covering a lot of the topics, the reality of the sort of divide that exists. So we'll talk about some perspective, because it's super important that you understand that when you start to put together marketing campaigns. And honestly, even before that, when you start to collect the requirements for the products that you're building, it's super, super important. And then I'll talk about what the product was, just again as an educational piece. Then we'll go through the opportunity, challenges, and some of the plans and things that we actually executed on over the life of that project. So we'll start with perspective, some of the audience and the challenges that we had. And I think some of the interplay that you saw between Britt and Leonard was very good and very timely. It's reality. I mean, there's definitely a divide that exists out there in the world. What I will suggest to you is not only is there sort of a divide between engineering and maybe marketing in the sort of jokey sense, but there's also one between IT. And when you start to market more and more to engineering, in quotes, there's an IT angle on that, and I'll talk about it. But for me, I think there's a quote up here from Stephen Covey that talks about understanding perspective, really, and it's, you must look at the lens through which we see the world, and that lens itself shapes how you interpret things. And for me, it's a super important topic, because as you market things, the people that you're marketing are going to look at things through a very different lens. As an example, the product that we produced for the Smart Glance and Wonderware Online, I mean, it uses tablets and phones for basically C-level managers inside infrastructure and plants. They're looking at their phones and their tablets to basically see how plants are operating and running things. So their perspective on this was important because it was real-time information for them. However, the engineers that implement and install it, their lens for it was very different. They're not necessarily using it for that. They're sort of the providers of that for their customers. And so the perspective that they had on things was very different. So how we marketed to them, how we educated them, how we overcame objections and things was very, very different. So what I would suggest to you is that the perspective is super important in understanding who your audience is, who your buyers are, and also keep in mind that today it's more and more of a diverse group. It's not just an engineering group that you're necessarily marketing to, but it's their customers as well, and I'll talk through that. And so the lens of how you see the requirements that end users may have, the value that they see varies, right, based on kind of who they are and what they do and what they're responsible for in a business. A classic example for us is that a lot of times we put in systems that are operational and they're used by plant management. And so they have a set of requirements, a set of values that are very important to them. And so the message that we have for that audience is very specific to that. Maximizing plant uptime, doing process centerlining, things like that. You step right next to that, and the group that has to implement it, install it, a lot of times on the engineering side, cares more about some of the cybersecurity requirements and things like that. So once again, the requirements and the value that's seen is certainly an important perspective. And last but not least, I would say the risk reward on things is also important. This is, in particular, important for new product introductions, especially if you're in an industrial or a manufacturing market like we are, because it tends to be conservative and slow-moving. So if you have a value proposition for a solution that you're marketing, it better significantly outweigh the risk side of things. Otherwise, you're going to have kind of an uphill battle. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through things. So a little bit more perspective on engineers and engineering, how we see it, and maybe this is a bit about trends. But more and more, engineering has become what we call multi-craft, or multi-hatted, if you will, that engineers today have multiple jobs. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot more of them have to deal with IT technologies in their day-to-day lives. It's not just about sort of the pure sense of engineering, but there's an IT angle on it. And so that means that they're stretched in more directions than they have been in the past. Their disciplines aren't as specific as they were, meaning if you're just a chemie or a PE, chemical engineer, process engineer, you're going to have some IT perspective. You're going to have a little more savvy in terms of IT technologies. The other thing I'll suggest on engineering that we have found is that they're much more customer-facing, in quotes, than ever has been in the past. And by customer-facing, I mean twofold. One is that engineers have internal customers more so than ever. So they're building stuff or engineering things for an internal audience as much as they are oftentimes building stuff for an external audience and external customers, if you will. And that has implications for marketing and education as well on how you actually bring them up to speed on your new products, how you position things, and how you market things. So multi-hat, multi-craft, if you will, very busy, very active, and very diverse in terms of what they're doing. The other thing that modern engineering, I think, as a challenge is there's a significant amount of industry drivers that plagues every industry that's out there. Now, again, our perspective is industrial manufacturing, right, and infrastructure. And so these are some of the key things that sort of impact our engineering community. Certainly things like workforce dynamics. You've got an aging workforce in the infrastructure and manufacturing. You can read basically any piece you like about that. And what that means is that you've got an older workforce that's tending to retire, or you've got a workforce that's working longer if their stock portfolios aren't working out like many of us are. And so what you have is retooling. So you're re-educating a lot more of the workforce. And that sort of taxes the engineering world. Plus, you've got a lot of new people coming on board, younger generations just out of college, that bring with them a new dynamic in terms of workforce, different expectations on how technology should work, usability, things like that. So in addition to that, other market dynamics that face engineering are things like regulatory compliance in our industry. Pharmaceutical, food and beverage, so FDA, CFR Part 11. There's all these different regulations that impact engineering that sort of stresses what they have to do every day in order to deliver their solutions, their products, right, in order to be successful. So you have to keep these industry drivers, right, these dynamics in mind as you sort of put yourself in the seat of your buyers or the people you're marketing to. So besides industry drivers, there's also a tremendous amount of technology trends that sort of can't be ignored. And Leonard talked about sort of the tech side of engineering, the sort of geeky factor, right, of all the specs and all the cool stuff. Yeah, there's that, for sure. But it can't be ignored, right, all joking aside. Things like mobile technology and mobility, things like tablets, things like software as a service and cloud, they're an inevitability. And they're things that certainly have to be managed by engineering groups, and they have significant, deep sort of implications for how businesses will operate now and in the future. And I bring this up because as you start to look at launching new products and marketing to people, a lot of these things can catch you by surprise. In fact, a few of these did catch us by surprise, which I'll talk about in a little bit later here. The other thing about modern engineering is, innovation and technology is expected, very much so. I mean, there is a side of all engineers that just love to see a lot of the interesting technologies, but it has to be done in a very pragmatic way or practical way, and Leonard sort of, I think, clued us in on some of that earlier. So innovation and technology for what you bring to market has to be interesting to them, but it also has to be very pragmatic in terms of helping them address their problems, whether it's those industry solutions I mentioned earlier or the industry dynamics or the technology trends. And how do these things actually help address that and do that in a very pragmatic way. I think the other thing that's probably the most common is a super amount of, we'll call it healthy skepticism. It's the show me crowd for sure. And the classic lines are always, it sounds like marketing to me, bring me out the proof points, show me kind of how your stuff works. Not only is this important for an engineering audience, but when you're launching a brand new product that hasn't necessarily been proven in the market, and you're using new technologies and new terminologies like cloud, like software as a service or mobility, which was our case, this becomes even more important issue to deal with. In fact, it reminds me, there was back in the day when I used to do a lot of product-centric things with customers, voice of customer sessions, there was a particular customer, he had a saying that he said, how real, it had to do with how real your product actually was. And he said, the reality of your product is basically inversely proportional to the number of slides or pages in a brochure you have. In other words, the more slides you show me, the less product you probably have. Or the more pages in your brochure, the less real your product is. And that's really the epitome of this whole sounds like marketing to me and the whole credibility game that we see quite a bit. I'd say lastly on the engineering and marketing front, cool stuff still rules the day. So yes, there's a pragmatic piece. Yes, it's got to have business value. We'll get into all that. But there's also a coolness factor that you can tap into that's going to help you promote things much better. We leverage the heck out of the solution that we're talking about on the fact that it was very hip, very cool, it's very social, it's mobile, it's cloud, blah, blah, blah. So there is a coolness factor here that certainly applies to the psyche of engineering and manufacturing IT. Now, having said all that, our goal is to sort of market better, deliver products, and in a lot of cases, sell more revenue, more profitability, all that good stuff. So the question you have to ask yourself is how do we, when we look at this engineering community, how do we give them more time, right, in their days? If they're busy, if they're multi-hatted, if they're doing lots of different things, how do you make their lives easier, right? What are the things that help them get promoted? What are the things that they get fired for, right? And sort of help them along the way to address those things. How do you make life easier for them? Because again, if you've got all these industry and technology trends that are spinning around there, regulatory compliance, technologies, how do we make that simpler, right, for the end user, right, for the audience? And your message has to speak to that. How do we keep it cool, right? Especially in our industry where it's industrial manufacturing and infrastructure, there is a lot of cool stuff going on, but it tends to be a conservative market, tends to be more slow moving. And so how do we make that more progressive and interesting? And along the way, how do you address those in industry, those technology trends, and address the business challenges that we have? And oh, by the way, how do you do that in a credible fashion so people know it's real, believe it's real? And again, keep in mind, this is from the perspective of a new product introduction, so an area where we haven't really sort of been, and there really aren't any sort of incumbents in the market. So that's really the challenge. So that's the backdrop. Bottom line, keep in mind the perspective of the engineering and the audience that you're using. Know that the dynamics there have changed. Know that there's oftentimes multiple personalities, or sometimes we call them personas, that you have to understand and market to and address to. What I'll do now is talk a little bit about seamless process and production experience. This is the product that we launched. Again, I'll just keep it to 2 minutes so I don't torture you with too much detail on it, but I do think it's important to understand. And again, as the backdrop, industrial manufacturing, controls, right, that software world, and taking some fairly progressive stuff into that market about 3 years ago. So the product itself is called Wonderware Online and SmartGlance, not necessarily important, but that's what they are. It leverages cloud technologies because that was a technical enabler for us that lowered the cost complexity of releasing these solutions to market. It used to be super expensive. You stand up a server, you install software, you add a bunch of people, and before you know it, the average server loaded costs about 50 grand for basically 50 grand a year per server that you stand up in a major corporation these days. Those are some of the rates that you'll see. Those are a very cost-effective way of doing that because it's using cloud and leveraged technologies. Second piece of it was mobile clients, enabling production manufacturers, process engineers, C-level people to actually see on their mobile devices what's going on in the plants. It's like the first thing all of us probably do every day is turn your smartphone on, take a look at the news, critical emails, text messages. This is that for plants and infrastructure and manufacturing, okay? And there's a great deal of value in this real-time decision-making, allowed them to prioritize work. It really addressed a lot of needs in our industry and our market. And so it was a great in terms of concepts and perspective, and it's really doing well here. But as you'll see, there were quite a bit of some challenges that we had along the way. So here's a real quick demonstration for you. So in our world, the way manufacturing works is you've got a lot of different plants or facilities that tie to PLCs, controllers, devices, basically different systems and sources that feed information up. All that stuff is typically dealt with in a siloed fashion, and meaning they're really dealt with where one plant can only see a certain amount of information. And that information is typically trapped. You can't necessarily see other systems, you can't see other plants. I think you might have to hit play, by the way, on this animation for it to go. Yeah, maybe hit that, see if that works. There we go, it's a little better. There's nothing overly dramatic here, by the way. So as we basically have plants or facilities that are connected to these different control units, lighting systems, lifts in airports, all these things, it becomes easy to manage them on a very secular, sort of simple level, where it's a singular unit that basically gives you visibility into those. The problem is that it's very hard today to manage multiple plants, multiple sites, multiple assets, and that's where everything's going. Supply chains are becoming more and more complicated. All the sort of different technologies that are out there make it more difficult for you to do this. I don't know what this is, but that's not it. So, yeah, this is, yeah, I don't know what that is. That's some sound for something else. But anyways, the video is not working, obviously, but this would have given you a sense for basically how this stuff works. Not a big deal. The other piece of this I would show you is that it takes all the information that's shown inside of a plant and shows it up on a mobile phone. So Android, iOS, tablets. I think you guys all get the concept there. But what's important about it is it's very unique in this industry that's very conservative. I mean, to get that information out of a system typically requires someone walking up to a machine inside of a plant floor, looking at it on that specific device, as opposed to having it on their mobile devices and mobile phones. So that's all. We can kind of move on from this since it doesn't look like the video, the actual video itself works. So with that in mind, that was our thing. So it's a managed solution. It's in this industrial manufacturing world. It's mobile technology meets cloud. Why? Cost effective, super easy to manage, maintain, low cost complexity. So as far as the market opportunities and challenges go, a couple things. On the opportunity side for us, it was a great opportunity because this was super valuable. If you used to stand up a server and it cost you 50 grand to do that, and you do that 100 times inside of an organization, and we can drop that cost significantly, there's a lot of value there, number one. Number two, the end users of this, the people that are running plants and trying to plan their days, can start before they show up at the plant, right? Before they show up at the facility, because they've got in their pocket kind of a running log of how things are going for the day. So they can basically treat it like their newspaper of the morning for their job. Kind of the same way a lot of us do maybe with social media or other things on our devices. So it was super valuable in terms of value proposition. It was definitely innovative. In our industry, no one had really talked about this at all 3 years back, 4 years back. And so we knew we had kind of a first mover advantage we wanted to take advantage of from the marketing perspective, which of course is also beneficial. It addressed the industry and tech trends that we talked about. Complexity, lower cost and complexity, aging workforce, more people coming in, younger audience expects different usability, different systems. And of course, it was very, very much a modern thing, and also very cool. The other thing I can tell you about the coolness technology side is there's a sort of a side benefit to being on the leading edge of this with an engineering community. And that is, there's a selfish benefit for them to be up on the latest and greatest technology because it's great for them to build their resume, right? Not that you want any of your teams to move on, but as you market being part of this new technology, there's also an ancillary benefit to engineers to say, hey, wow, I don't have a lot of experience with Microsoft Azure, right? Cloud computing, software as a service, or mobile device activities. So when we looked at some of the marketing, there were some benefits there as well. So the opportunity was clearly there for us. The marketing challenges, or the Marquette challenges, I say, were pretty high, were pretty significant. We got a lot of initial commentary, things like, I don't get it. It's a whole new way of operating. I mean, we used to take a box, put it on the floor, connect it to stuff, here's my screen, perfect. Now I'm seeing diagrams of clouds and people's little game devices showing my plant. All right, I don't get it. So we get a lot of that. We also got a super healthy dose of the skepticism from the engineering side of the fence on, does this stuff really work? And similarly, credibility-wise, is it proven? It's one thing to prove that you have a product and it works. It's another thing to demonstrate that somebody in the industry is using it in a credible fashion, right? A site reference, a major customer, et cetera. So that's another challenge that was, upfront and critical. The other thing is fairly obvious is how is this better? I know I've had these PCs, servers, machine solutions sitting on my floor. They've worked for 20, 30 years. Why is this a better solution? So we'd get a lot of that. And of course, the whatabouts, which are my favorite. What about this? What about that? This is where the engineers take you in the back room and kind of beat you up about security, privacy, all those things. And so for each one of these, we really systematically had a plan, a marketing plan, a launch plan, a set of activities to go and take these things down one by one. On the I don't get it side, we had to do a tremendous amount of missionary work, if you will, educating the industry and the market on some of this stuff because it was new. It's not like people knew what these things were and how they worked. We spent a lot of time on the demonstration side. In fact, one of the first things I'll get into we did is we work on demos to show people this stuff's real and put it in their hands quickly and easily. And on the is it proven and real, we had to find proof points in customers. It's very hard to do on a new product introduction, especially before it's launched, because by definition, you don't have any customers. So that's a challenge. And then, of course, on the value props, making sure that it's clearly articulated for the different audiences that you have. Plant managers will have a very different value prop that they care about than will the engineers that are installing and configuring it, right? Than the quality techs that may use it, or the cybersecurity person who's auditing the heck out of how this stuff works. And then on the what about side, making sure we have a message around product, that it's secure, it's protected, all these types of things. And that sort of leads us to, okay, the marketing plan and execution. And I will also say that the question earlier came up, about sort of launching and who drives what. We definitely work with engineering, product management teams side by side from the get-go. The business side leads in terms of what we're going to build, how we're going to build it, where we want to go, and the engineering teams, the marketing teams all sort of rally around that. We don't divide. We used to do that 15 years ago, divide and conquer. Here's my requirements doc, throw it over the wall to engineering. That's just not how we roll. And if there's interest in the Q&A session, I can talk more about that. But here's the marketing plan and execution. And I'm just going to give you some highlights, because again, Marianne will talk more about how you run an integrated campaign far better than I could. But a couple lessons that I thought I would tell you. First of all, don't be afraid to learn from and partner with the leaders. So this was a software as a service and a mobile thing. So the first thing that we actually did was we partnered very early on. We worked with Microsoft, who, if you haven't heard, has this thing called Office 365, has this thing called Microsoft Azure. It's the whole cloud-based thing. So years ago, we went to them and partnered with them to help us get a leg up on this whole program and help us on some of the marketing things. The reason you want to do that is for a number of reasons. One is it'll give you a greater voice that can help you get your message out, help you leverage an audience that maybe you couldn't reach. Maybe you can't get to a CIO level because of where you typically sell and position your stuff. It will give you a reach into other industries, give you a reach into other groups, other forums, other events. Adds credibility. If we're backed by Microsoft, it helps sort of mitigate some of that credibility factor that we talked about initially. Collaboration. As we started to look at plans, including our marketing activities and launch plans, they collaborated with us, gave us inputs, helped us craft our message. They certainly helped on the education and the missionary side. Half the objections that we had heard, is it secure, is it reliable, is it protected, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? They had already done that work 10 years ago, or 7 years ago at the time. And so we were able to leverage a lot of that work. So partnering saved us a ton of money and a ton of time and bought us a lot of credibility, and we're much better off by doing it. The other thing is occasionally, depending on if you pick your partners right, you may be able to get funding, more marketing funding. But I'm sure everyone here doesn't have a problem with budgets ever. So I'm sure that's not of any interest. But seriously, there's quite a bit of funding that you can get from these programs. So let's talk a little bit about the marketing plan around education. So as I mentioned, this was kind of a new thing in a new space in our world, right? Certainly all the social bots have been running around with Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, streaming music. But cloud, software as a service, and mobile in our industry, right, in our industrial manufacturing segment was not new. So we spent a lot of time working on the market with webinars, seminars, our user group meetings, and our sales and marketing conferences. So we put together a series of seminars that were really educational about what is this stuff, what does it mean, how does it help us, and we did that with a number of different partners. But that was a key part of this education, is almost missionary work. Like before you start sort of promoting and selling your stuff, you kind of have to educate the market that, hey, this stuff's out there, it's real, and it's pretty provocative stuff in terms of what it can do for our industry, for our world, sort of transformational. We also worked quite a bit with, obviously, press and media outlets just to talk about this. And this actually picked up pace when we started to get some of the early adopters before we launched the product on board. And of course, with analysts and analyst briefings as well. This was super helpful because the more you talk about analysts with this stuff, the more they talk about it, the more we start to write about it, hear about it. So you get this sort of snowball effect of support from a lot of different areas. And again, the lens on this one is it's education. It's telling people, hey, there's this new stuff out there. You might have thought it was for a social media world, but guess what? It has implications for our business, our industry. Here's how, here's why. And it helps us sort of craft the different messages to the different audiences. And of course, customers, we would educate our customers on this as well because they would want to adopt this, but we need to bring them along the way and educate them on how it's better and how things are different. Probably the most difficult part of this whole journey, if you will, is the credibility and the proof points. Mostly because it's very hard for you to get early adopters for things, right? Especially if you run an industry where it's fairly conservative and actually mission critical, right? We don't stop power plants and water plants and things like these. These are so-called real mission critical systems. So on the credibility and proof side of things, two things. From the day we launched this, we had a download and try initially. So people literally in like 2 steps could go to the App Store, whether it's the Apple App Store or Microsoft Store, download this thing, see a sample of it in real life, even though it wasn't connected to their plant, and see what real data would look like, what a real solution would look like. Basically, that's stealing an idea from any of the app stores that are out there. I don't know if your kids or maybe some of you are game into some of these things, but everyone downloads the free thing first, and then if they like it, they pay the whatever it is, $1, $20 for the different thing. And so there's this sort of sense that now that instant gratification needs to be there for these types of solutions. So we did a demonstration download system, and that was all part of this marketing campaign to say, hey, how do we get this stuff into people's hands? How do we overcome these things? So we did a try-buy, we did a sample system. We also chased early adopters. So we went out and worked with customers who would put this stuff in pre-production release, work with us on the requirements, but also would help us sort of promote it. And then, of course, we got initial customer successes very quick. Those first customers that were early adopters obviously became customers, and they helped us promote it. Among the most, I think this one screenshot here is Rick Molden. He was one of the very first ones, did a webinar with us, talking about how he's used this in his facilities, his plants. They basically make asphalt for all the street crews that run around and patch the streets and put in asphalt. The other early customer adopter we got was General Mills, who presented at some of our customer events for us on how they've used it to enable their all their food manufacturing plants and how their plant managers use that as basically a daily dashboard before they head into work. So having these customer successes and early adopters were critical because then they sort of fed into our campaigns. We could talk about them, we could write about them, we could have them present for us at our user groups and at our different events. So super, super beneficial. Since the last demonstration of this didn't work, I'm guessing this one probably won't too, but this was just more or less an anecdotal example of some of the outputs that the marketing team created around the educational pieces. So we worked with Microsoft, who really provided us with some great guidance on how do you tell a story in about 2 minutes about what this thing is about, what this solution's all about. So we'll try, and if it works, I'll talk through it. If not, then I'll just tell you, well, that looks a little better. We don't need the sound, though. You might want to just, mute the sound. Basically, I'll just talk over it. But the idea was telling people, hey, here's our story. We have this solution today in manufacturing where the challenge is how do you enable visibility across multiple sites and multiple systems, whether it's supply chain, whether it's multiple control units, whether it's airports, whether it's power plants, food plants, doesn't matter. How do you get that information in a secure fashion and very cost effectively into the people that needed to make decisions? And so we basically described how today there are siloed information that sits out there from robots, PLCs, RTUs, control units, all these things that control our daily lives. We feed that information up into these systems. Well, a better way is to make sure that we drop those barriers. We make it transparent to see that information anywhere, any way, through this new cost-effective technology. And it's, by the way, it's called Wonderware Historian Online. It's this fully featured environment where you can take all the information that exists inside of a facility, whether it's pumps, flow rates, water temperatures, energy consumption, feed it up into this system. And then we have this ability for you to see it anywhere you are, off the plant floor, on the plant floor, in your car, not while you're driving. And basically what it does is allows us to take that information, feed it up, display it through these applications, these mobile applications on smartphones and tablets, and allow you to make better decisions. And of course, all this technology that's behind Smart Glance, behind this Wonderware Online, is all based on a brand in the company that you might have heard of called Microsoft. And it's all based on Windows Azure. And so this basically came out, and this talks about the value props that Windows Azure brought to the mix, quick and easy implementation, really boiled down the salient points of the educational stuff that we came up with as we sort of rolled out this program, and boiled it down into a nice, really super succinct sort of 2-minute vignette that sort of educates people on what it is, why it matters, and how it works. And so there was a raft of these types of activities, these types of deliverables that were used by the marketing teams as part of the campaign that actually made quite a difference in the overall campaign for us. So that's just one example. Again, there's lots of other ones, and Marianne will talk a bit about some of the things that we also did in these integrated campaigns. The other thing I'll say is getting the word out. So once we sort of got through that missionary work, if you will, the initial stages, the education, kind of learning these things, we did quite a bit of work on awareness. Web, as you'd expect, sort of web content, web pages, links into different things, certainly things like Google AdWords. Obviously, we did a lot of what I would consider old school, at least in our industry, which are road shows, where we literally would partner with Microsoft, go to their offices, we'd host customers, have them come in, and we'd spend a half a day talking to them about what this solution, this technology can do for their industry, for their business. So it had to do with, obviously, all the things that go along with that, mailings and getting sure the invitations were out there, the message was right, get them in. We had lead gen that was part of that. So the road shows are actually, I think, very effective in this because there's nothing like having a captive audience, right, to be able to talk to them about your solutions. And of course, social media. The other thing I haven't spent a lot of time on is, but we were very, very careful about the value-focused and customer-facing message of this. It's very easy on the engineering side to get into the tech-weenie, cool, bits, bytes stuff, and yeah, we had to have that. But to be honest with you, when we initially started this campaign, that stuff was, I would say, more front and center, and it caused us more trouble. What we found is that as soon as we had the customer examples and we showed them what it could do and people that were using it, a lot of the objections in the tech stuff sort of went away. It was still there, but it became in the background, not the foreground. And so you ended up talking about addressing those as oh, by the way, do you do those things, as opposed to, I'm not sure we can do this because it's on a mobile device, and I have a corporate policy that says this. So the value-focused messaging was certainly an important part of this, and that customer-facing angle was certainly important as well. So I guess the other thing I would say about this on the marketing plan of attack, and I can't remember if Marianne talks about this, but best laid plans, but be flexible. We started this thing off, like I said, about 3.5 years ago, and I'll tell you the initial plan and idea is very different than how we ended up. And that's particularly useful for new product introductions, new areas of the business, because you don't know what you don't know. So I can't tell you enough, be flexible, iterate, refine your message, refine working, and the sooner you can get out in front of your customers, in front of your users, use that, right? Use that information, that feedback. It'd be immensely valuable to you, rather than waiting to the very end and big bang, here goes the launch, here goes the release. Because my experience is most times on NPIs like that, if you take that sort of waterfall approach, you're going to get it wrong. And so it's better to have an iterative process along the way. The other thing is listen to feedback. Our partners in this Microsoft had already gone through a lot of these hurdles and said, oh yeah, you don't want to go that way. We did that and it hurt. So go this way, right? Go right instead. Customers, distributors, partners, and sales teams were also very instrumental to getting the messaging and the marketing right on these things. And honestly, a lot of the analyst firms as well. And I guess the last thing is obvious, don't be afraid to sort of learn on these things. Learn on the fly. Make the decisions that you think are the right sort of course, and don't be afraid to course correct. I've seen a lot of people sort of struggle with making a decision that, going back on a decision that they made, not with campaigns like this. Fail fast is, I guess, the startups. One of the mantras from startups. Same thing applies here. If it's not working out, cut it off quick and change directions and move on. So in closing, I went a little quicker here, but again, I was talking a bit about this mobile cloud thing. That's really not the point. The point is it was a new product introduction in a new market, in a new area. And our industry has all these different dynamics that are going on with workforce changes. We've got regulatory stuff going on. Not necessarily the most, I would say, a very conservative industry because it's mission critical. We put lights on. We provide power, water, pharmaceutical drugs to people. I mean, it's super serious stuff. And so a lot of those things were certainly important. The audience challenges we talked about, the objections that we overcame along the way, I can't tell you enough. Get those up and identified early and often, and then have a real succinct message and approach to how you're going to attack those things. If the objection is cybersecurity, have a solution for it. Make sure that your sales teams, marketing teams know how to message around that. Make sure your value propositions are very quick. And like I said, focus on, in this case, education, educating the market, getting the users to understand what's going on, what the market's actually doing. Demonstrate the value, show them it's real. take out the healthy skepticism, get early adopters as early as often, and then all those things, they sort of pour into this great marketing machine that you can use. And you have early adopters, they use your stuff, they love it, they become a success story. When they become a success story, they're speaking at your user event. When they speak to your user event, other people talk to them and say, oh, wow, this is great. If General Mills is using this, it must not be too bad. And it just sort of has these sort of fingers that spread. So I guess like I'd say, the last thing I would say is execute like mad. A lot of these things, they just don't happen without a lot of hard work. And setting up road shows and seminars, I know certainly Mary Ann can talk more about this, and she spent more time doing it than I did. But there's a heck of a lot of work, as you all know about this. But it certainly pays off to be diligent and to work hard on these things. That's the type of stuff, yep.
And how did you address it in your marketing collateral?
Sure. So two sides of that. How did we do this? Address the cybersecurity. First of all, it has to be built in from day one. So it's not something you just say later on, we'll make it safe and secure. It's got to be cybersecure initially. Now, luckily, by partnering with Microsoft, we were able to head off a lot of that stuff initially. They obviously they have a team of people that wake up every day and all they worry about is cyber. So we tagged off them in terms of how to develop this and do it. The specifics of it are we can restrict the way in which we share information with the cloud. A lot of cases, it's one way only. So the information is delivered up, but no one can maliciously get in and actually go back into a plant and make control decisions, for example. So there's different layers of security that were implemented as a part of this that made it the way that it is. And again, it's largely in part by working with partners like Microsoft, and there's others that helped us develop that and build it. Now, from the messaging and marketing side, we also worked with companies like Microsoft and a few others that helped us on the messaging side of how to position these things and how to describe them. We also created white papers for the tech audience on how the best way to secure these things. It gets into the bits and bytes of the protocols and the HTTPS and blah, blah, blah stuff. But those are all sort of collateral pieces that were certainly part and parcel of this. But to be honest with you, I think the single biggest thing that made the difference was when customers adopted it. And so the more we talk about the value that we could show and the people that were using it around the world, Coca-Cola using it for energy management, General Mills using it for this, CME Industries using it for their things, that helped a lot with the credibility side. So the cybersecurity question is there, but it sort of kind of faded away a bit as more and more people adopted it because it became more accepted. It's just kind of like the consumer side of things, right? I don't know about you guys, but when this stuff all kind of came out, everyone was a little bit shaky about using mobile phones and PCs for online banking and all this other stuff. Now, what's not in the cloud, right? And so we sort of think that that's going to kind of follow the same adoption in our industry. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but...
All right, any other questions from the audience? Go ahead, Robin.
My question is about the
Hold on, we have a microphone.
Mm-hmm.
Robin from Cummins will be asking the next question from...
My question's about the Wonderware logo, the graphic. Could you tell us how that was developed and who was involved in the decision, the choices that you made along the way? Were the engineers involved?
The decisions about the logo?
About the logo.
About to use the logo?
About what direction to go with the logo, what it should look like. I'm sure you probably had several possibilities at the beginning. The selection process.
Sure.
Did you show it to customers? Did you show it to engineers? Sure. How did you get feedback?
Yeah, so I think there's a great session coming up later about brand. So I'm glad you asked the question. The Wonderware brand in our industry, in our world, is fairly well recognized. And it's been around since the 80s, mid-80s. And in our industry, hundreds of thousands of plants, literally, have Wonderware. You walk into the plants and they know Wonderware. And some of our other brands, like Foxborough, have the same sort of prestige. And the logo is a part of that. It's ingrained in that. The brand is Wonderware. Whether it's the Smart Glance product or the Historian product or the whatever, that's what people associate us with it. So we absolutely leverage that with this product and a lot of the other ones that are related in that same family because there's a sense of comfort and there's an established brand identity, all that stuff. So for us, it was non-negotiable. We're going to stick with that brand, obviously leverage that and continue to do so. And as far as the team involvement goes, like all things, all the teams are involved as we go along with icons and iconography and graphics and stuff. However, from the business perspective and the product perspective, we're relentless about being very focused on our brands and our brand identity. Absolutely relentless about it. In a good way.
Next question. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you, Rob.
Great,
I appreciate your...
Yeah, thank you.
Details to that presentation. Like I said in the past, we've asked Rob to speak because we know he The Wonderwear brand has a lot of credibility in industrial manufacturing, and we also know that he's got very good ideas about bringing products to market and how he does it. So we appreciate that, Rob, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to present today.